Hello, my name is Henry Tidy. Today I'm going to talk about climate change, water, and the general situation in the Middle East. I'll also present a new film project called Water Isn't Heaven Sent, which talks about these issues in the Middle East. It is well established that the atmosphere directly determines the Earth's climate. This climate is extremely important for the existence of life and also of humans on Earth. Climate experts have been able to trace back the composition of the atmosphere in the past and have found that there has always been a direct correlation between the atmosphere and the temperature on Earth. Life on Earth has evolved in function of the planet's climate. In the past, there were greater concentrations of carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide has been removed from the atmosphere by microorganisms in the oceans and on land over millions of years. These microorganisms have in part become fossil fuels on which we are massively dependent today. The fact that so much of our human activity depends on these fossil fuels is a major barrier to finding a transition towards cleaner energies. These graphs show the strict correlation between the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and past climatic events, such as glaciation. The second graph shows the match between carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere and temperature over the past 400,000 years, based on ice core drilling taken in the Antarctic. This graph shows how much humans over the past 150 years have increased the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. As we can see from 1900s onwards, the temperature of the planet has increased by approximately 1 degree. The scientific community is now trying to find out what will happen to the climate over the next 100 years. Numerous models are put forward according to how much effort and how successful we are at reducing the amount of carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere. Different models exist, suggesting an increase between 2 and 6 degrees over the next 100 years. As temperatures increase, what impacts can be expected? Of the major threats of climate change, we can expect that overall the climatic system globally will be radically modified. This will have major impacts on food production. We can expect to have more extreme weather events, whether that be increased floods, storms, or also droughts. These events are going to push the most vulnerable populations into a situation of despair. Climate change can therefore be expected to destabilize the most fragile countries, encourage the displacement of populations and internal migration, as well as make conflicts more likely. This map shows the vulnerability of different areas around the world regarding climate change. As we can see, the countries along the equator and also in South Asia are those that are the most vulnerable to climate change. By vulnerability, we understand that this is the countries and the areas that are least able to adapt to climate change and to protect its population. The second map shows roughly the same trends, where southern Sahel and Central Asia are extremely vulnerable to climate change. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of points. We often talk, especially since the crisis of 2008, about our dependence on oil and the financial system. However, in reality, we ultimately depend on the natural resources of this planet, the sun, the rain, the soil, the atmosphere, to keep us alive. These provide us with energy, warmth, food, water, air. Also, over the past 2 centuries, we have become increasingly dependent on fossil fuels. These fossil fuels have had, by and large, positive effects. We're 5 times as many on this planet as we were 200 years ago. We live longer, and our lives are more comfortable. All this could be seen as an achievement. In fact, we've never lived so well. What needs to be borne in mind, though, is that millions of years ago, the Earth used to be a hostile place with a toxic atmosphere, impossible for human life. Slowly, the atmosphere was purified by rainfall, photosynthesis by plants. The carbon was extracted and in part stocked in coal, oil, and gas. However, by burning these fossil fuels, we're putting back into the atmosphere the carbon that forests and marine life took millions of years to extract. When we burn fossil fuels, we are turning the planet's clock back hundreds of millions of years. By burning vast amounts of carbon, we are completely changing the atmosphere, and humanity is now entering an era that it has never known. However, historical evidence shows that peoples have always moved when climatic conditions have been difficult. For example, the end of the Roman Empire is thought to have been accelerated by the arrivals of people moving from northern Europe to the south as they were escaping a short cold period in history. Another example of an unusual climatic phenomenon affecting people was a massive volcanic eruption in 1815 in Indonesia. During the following year, the sun's rays were blocked, and it was known as the year without summer. This cold forced people to immigrate from Europe. However, what we can expect in the coming decades will be an increase in temperatures around the world, which will increase the number and the strength of extreme weather events, such as intense flooding and powerful storms. We can also expect that in already marginal areas, the climate will be increasingly hostile and deserts will advance. Along coasts, with the rising of sea levels, we can expect land to be lost, and also with increased flooding, we will lose fertile soils. Higher temperatures will mean increased evaporation rates, and less surface water will be available. Also, we can expect that parasites will move further north and further south around the globe, and invasive species can spread. Climate change will also affect food production around the world. Record food prices have been just one of the ingredients in the unrest in the Arab world. However, they are causing major concern across the globe for the second time in 3 years. Structural shifts have led to a tightening of the international food supply system, magnifying the effect of disruptive events such as weather-related crop failures in 2010. With no quick relief in sight, an era of cheap food appears to be over. Protesters were on the streets of the world's top wheat importer, Egypt. And in Tunisia, the rising cost of living was one of the main reasons for discontent against the government. The Mediterranean region is particularly interesting regarding climate change. Globally, the north of the Mediterranean receives adequate amounts of rainfall, whereas North Africa and the Middle East tends to suffer from shortages of water. In fact, the Middle East is the region with the scarcest water resources in the world. So the question we can ask ourselves is, how will climate change influence both the conflict and water situation in the Middle East? As we've just heard, the Middle East is one of the most water-stressed regions in the world. Water resources are limited. Populations in the region are set to double in the next 20 years. Lifestyles are changing, increasing water demands. The region is dependent on imports of food and international aid in the case of the Palestinian territories and Jordan. Combine this with a recent history of wars, notably in 1948, 56, 67, 73, and ongoing conflicts between and within states, not to mention the recent revolutions in the Arab states and the civil war in Syria, and it becomes easy to understand that we're dealing with an unstable and fragile region. The question is, what happens when climate change kicks in this part of the world? Now let's look more specifically at the area of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories. Rather like in the Mediterranean region, there is a clear-cut divide between the northern part of this area, where there is abundant rainfall, and the south, which is a desertic area. The countries just mentioned all share the same water resource, namely the Jordan Valley. The Jordan River takes its water from the mountains of southern Lebanon, Syria, northern Israel, and Jordan. The river then flows south towards the Dead Sea. However, today, nearly none of this water arrives in the Dead Sea, as the water resources are massively overexploited by the states in question. For example, Israel, which takes the largest proportion of this water, has a complex pumping system to take water from the Lake of Galilee down towards the south of Israel. The other states have also dammed the rivers leading to the Jordan. Only the Palestinians have no access to this water. So now I'd like to talk about the film project. Why have we chosen this angle? In reality, the conflict has been extensively reported on, and even if it's not always well understood, which is normal bearing in mind the complexity and decades of conflict, the questions we would like to ask in this film is, what can we learn from the situation? In particular, we would like to look at the link between water, climate change, and conflict. In addition, we attempt to talk about the situation in the region, but without allowing our attention to be completely monopolized by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In fact, there is much to be learnt from this case study region. For example, can the conflict be transformed into peace thanks to the environment, which knows no barriers, religion, or colour? People and plants need clean water wherever they are in the world. We all need air and food. These banalities are too easily forgotten in conflictual situations, but become a priority again when they are lacking. This is the premise of the work of Friends of the Earth Middle East, their concept of environmental peace building. In fact, this region can also provide a warning shot, a wake-up call for more comfortable parts of the world. When climate change starts causing drought and crop failure, people and states will revert to their basic instincts of survival. What will happen when vast areas of the globe become unviable and uninhabitable? We have a glimpse, a preview in the Middle East, where water is already a primordial issue and is becoming ever more so. More about this film project, Water Isn't Heaven Sent. So why this project? Because of the following observations. The fact is that climate change is poorly understood, and that by and large there is very little action. In Western countries the impact is hard to perceive. Also, for years I've worked on climate change. Specifically in 2009, 2010 I was in the Middle East, and I wanted to share my experience and learnings from that part of the world. So after 4 years of fundraising, planning, filming and editing, the film is due for release. So what are the conclusions and also the questions raised by this project? The fact is that climate change and water shortages will, initially, hit the most vulnerable, the poorest populations. And then over a longer period, the following decades, these changes risk making the region completely unstable and no longer viable. With at least plus 2 degrees centigrade expected in the region, the deserts are expected to advance 500 kilometers further north. Will any peace be possible in such conditions? Also, this region can serve as a laboratory and provide an insight into other complex and vast regions of the world, such as the wider Mediterranean or the Indian subcontinent. The key ideas that come out of this project are those of climate instability, threat to food security, economic and social instability. There is additionally the possibility for local conflicts to spill over to neighbouring regions. Also, bearing in mind that this region is heavily armed, there is even the nuclear bomb, one could talk about a threat for modern civilization. So what will be the uses of the film? The 52-minute film will be available in French, English, Hebrew and Arabic versions. In addition, there will be a web documentary with supplementary information and resources for teachers and students. I will also carry out a speakers tour in the Middle East, as well as conferences and lessons in universities and high schools in Europe.